My name is Regan and I am a photographer. Today I'm here to demystify Aperture. After you watch this video, you should feel more comfortable and confident using the manual modes on your camera. So let's dive right in. Aperture is one part of something called the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is made up of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Make sure to subscribe because I'm making a video about each one of these. All of these factors affect the brightness of your image and one other thing that you trade off. For aperture, it affects two things: the brightness and the blurriness of your background. Now, if you want to know how to get the blurriest backgrounds ever, then watch the video linked somewhere around here for how to get the blurry background in your photos. I made a whole big one because it's not just aperture that affects that. Get your pencils out, ladies and gentlemen, because you want to take notes. Aperture. The lower the aperture number, the more light you get and the more background blur. But the higher the aperture, the less light you get into your camera and the less background blur. Now, all of this is very theoretical, so let's go ahead and look at some concrete examples to help this make sense. Okay, I set up a little scene to show you how aperture affects both your exposure and blurriness of the background. I have a camera here, and then I have a couple objects to help show you. We've got a small candle, a candle holder, and some backdrop papers, and we're gonna look at what comes out of this camera. Okay, the first thing that I wanna look at is brightness. So we're gonna do that by keeping all of these settings the same and just changing our aperture. We're gonna start with kind of a middle of the road aperture of f5. And from there, I'm gonna show you how a lower aperture makes things brighter and a higher aperture makes things darker. So this is f5. Let's lower the aperture to something like 2.8. And then do you see how this is much brighter? None of the other settings have changed, but our lower aperture lets in more light so the picture is brighter. If we move it to something higher, like F11, you'll see that with all the settings the same, our photo is darker. So this is really the basis. The lower your aperture, the more light you let in. The higher your aperture, the less light you let in. All of this working together, you want a properly exposed image that is not too bright or too dark for your situation. Next, we're going to switch our dial to aperture priority mode, and I'm going to show you how aperture affects background blur. Once again, we will start at f5. You see that we have the small black candle at the front, a larger candle holder in the middle, and then our background papers at the back. Here's our shot at f5. We have a little bit of background blur, but if we want to increase that, we can lower our aperture down to 2.8 again. And now you'll see in comparison that we have more background blur. If we don't want background blur, we can increase our aperture to something like, let's just do f11 because we did that earlier. And now you'll see that at f11, the background is more in focus. So once again, lower aperture, more background blur, higher aperture, less background blur. Okay, so now you're probably wondering, Regan, that's all great and good, but what aperture do I use? And I'm gonna be that annoying teacher who says, it kind of depends. If you are artistically looking for background blur, a ton of people do this. This is especially popular in lifestyle and portraiture. You need to put your aperture as low as you can. On some lenses, that's 1.8. On some, it's 2.8. You will look and decide kind of what works best. This is also great if you're shooting indoors and you need more light, or the sun is starting to set and you need more light. So basically, that is the gist of it. If you are shooting something like product and you don't want any background blur, you do need to increase your aperture up. For me personally, I find starting at somewhere like f7 works really well. But then also understand that you need to bring more light into the image or adjust one of the other factors such as shutter speed or ISO to get a balanced image. Now, next video, we are breaking down shutter speed and then after that ISO, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss those. And I'll see you next time. Bye guys!